Talking about cybersecurity. If you didn't know what room you entered in, that's what we're talking about. So no, you're stuck. Sean, you're stuck here. What we hope to give you is a few insights of what's going on today and maybe some thoughts, ideas of what you can do to make your business more secure, kind of what actions you can take back. And so, but why do you care about cybersecurity? Why do we care? Why are we talking about it? I'm going to give you some statistics to kind of refresh you on the state of cybersecurity. The Internet Crime Complaint Center saw a 69% increase in complaints from 2019 to 2020, almost 800,000 complaints, with losses exceeding $4.1 billion. That's with a B. And the costliest attacks are business email compromise schemes. You get an email to you click on this link, do all this stuff. That was almost 20,000 complaints, or $1.8 billion of losses. The second one, by September 2020, the average ransom payout was about $234,000. That's the average ransom payout. So that's a high mark. And I think the last one is, in 2020, there were 7 million new phishing and scam pages created. The top 3 industries targeted: technology, retail, and finance. Maybe obvious, but just to remind you guys, you're in an industry that everyone's coming after. So because we think that it's getting harder, not easier to do cybersecurity practices, and because we think it should not be a one-time check the box, but a continual process you embed in your businesses, we wanted to take the time to share with you our experience and learnings from the cybersecurity from the technology perspective, because we live on the technology side of this. So I have 2 speakers here with me today. Just put my glasses on. Dan right here is founder and president of Liventus. He co-founded Liventus in 2002 as a spinoff of ECS Financial Services, which some of you may know, with the current CEO, Sam Oliva, which may be another person you know. He started out as the only programmer 18 years ago to 19 years ago, and now leads a team of 90 global developers. We build custom software and e-commerce solutions. We're headquartered in Dan's hometown of Northbrook, Illinois, which is a northern suburb of Chicago. So why he's interested in cybersecurity? So over the years, we came out of ECS Financial and Beacon Funding, if you know those, branched out on our own, but our client base has really been in the financial sector, in the fintech sector. And those guys have been just, like I mentioned before, have been ripe for hacking. So Dan has really had to take his company over the years and build the company's processes and staff around cybersecurity. He's also personally passionate about it. We invited a partner of ours. Ken Smith is from RSM. So RSM and Levintus has been partnering for over 10 years. Ken's team comes in and conducts training for our developers, so they're up on the latest cybersecurity measures and processes. So Ken is technical director within RSM's security and privacy risk consulting practice, is the national operation lead for cyber testing. He has over 10 years of experience in physical and cyber penetration testing, and he'll talk about that, and worked across a variety of industries. He's also spent 8 years at the University of Mount Union teaching information security coursework. Prior to that, he was a signals intelligence operator in the U.S. Army. He attended the University of Dayton and Notre Dame College for his undergraduate and graduate studies, respectively, and holds several offensive security-focused industry certifications. I'm Danielle Dolloff. I run sales and marketing for Liventus, which I guess makes me good at asking questions, because that's what I'll be doing of these fine gentlemen today. There's a lot to cover. Cybersecurity is a very broad topic with lots of tentacles and tangents we can go on. What we really tried to do is distill it to the most salient points. So you've got some takeaways until we leave some time at the end for questions, if the audience has any questions for these two. Okay, so I'm going to get right into it. Can you each tell us how you got interested in cybersecurity?
Sure. So thank you, the 4 of you, for coming today. Five, yeah. So I've always had an interest in cybersecurity. The industries that we play in, we were just forced to be compliant. The fintech industries, the prepaid card industries, loyalty and incentive, and the leasing industry. And as a younger company, when we were starting out 20 years ago, it's kind of daunting to pull all these compliances together and understand what you have to do to be compliant. So I had to take on that role and to figure out how to improve our security posture in order to be compliant and figure out what all that meant. And I did, and we did, and for the past 10 to 15 years, we've been SOC 2 Type 2 audited. We've done PCI compliant work for a lot of the software that we build. And the truth is, all software has flaws. I'm in software development my whole career. All software is made by humans. Humans are flawed. Software is flawed. So there's, what you want to understand is that there's a flaw density measure that says how many flaws per 1,000 lines of code do you have in your software, and you have to have an understanding of that you do have flaws and how to keep that down. And several years ago, I was part of a incident response team for a client of mine who was hacked. Vulnerability was exposed. Millions of dollars were taken. PII data was taken. Sometimes it's not about the money that ruins these companies and your companies. It's the reputation hit that you're going to take. Money in so many ways is replaceable. Reputation might not be. But my part in that was actually pretty heavy in terms of analyzing and figuring out what everything was being done that was good, which there was quite a lot of strengths, and what could have been done better to become even stronger. And it turns out that we analyzed over 1 billion records of data to actually find the bad actor that broke into that system. So that was a very victorious moment for us. Because of all the things we were doing right, it kind of gave us a successful outcome, and we were able to trace the evidence back to, we called him patient zero, because one piece of evidence led to another piece of evidence, led to another piece of evidence, which is very important to know that if you do things right, even though you might lose that game and get hacked, to have that trace, the proper trace and the proper logs, that's super cool and super important. So we did, because of the size of it and where we traced this guy, he's in Canada, we had to bring in the FBI, and we created an evidence packet for them, had several meetings with them, and they agreed and said this is definitely the guy, which was a very victorious moment for us. And it was kind of like, all right, let's go get him. All right, shotgun. And, I was expecting this, moment at O'Hare Airport where I'd see a perp walk, and but it didn't happen because the FBI, if you ever have to deal with them, they just don't care. And they've got their hands full. And they have, in the Chicago FBI office, there's a lot of agents, but there's only a small amount of agents that are cyber agents. So I don't know exactly how the FBI works, but every city has FBI offices. And so if you get hacked and you're in Buffalo or wherever you're at in Minnesota, you're going to deal with your local authorities, and it's too much for them to handle. So they're not going to be helpful. And then you have to deal with the FBI. I had an into the FBI through a connection. Otherwise, you have to go through an online form and just be lucky enough for them to call you back, which they never do. And the 10 agents at every one of our cities are overwhelmed with millions of hacks that are going on that are much more important than ours, even though ours was very critical to us at the time. So that kind of told me that we're on our own, right? And this is something that we have to, this is a business, not our business, but the cyber criminals are a business of their own, and we are our only defense. So that's what a very long answer to why I'm interested in cybersecurity, and the thrill of catching these guys is pretty cool.
Excellent. Yeah. So my background is, again, penetration testing, which is playing the role of the bad person, right? We use the same tactics, techniques, procedures that the bad folks are doing to try to find flaws in security programs before those legitimate actors can get to them, and then work with clients to help them patch their stuff and figure out what the misconfigurations are, whatever the case may be. So I got my start back in college. I started in computer engineering. My junior year, decided, engineering's not for me. I kind of like the computer piece. I'm going to stick with that. 2 months after the switch, I said, oh man, what did I do? I don't like this either. I was too far along in my academic career. I said, all right, I'm going to graduate, but let's do something radical. And so I ended up enlisting into the Army after college. Graduated December, enlisted. I was in basic training January 2nd, and went in for signals intelligence. And had a blast. Ended up getting a slot with 5th Special Forces Group and did signals intelligence for them for 3 years. My last year, when I committed to separating, it was like somebody had flipped a switch and said, you know what, we should really be better about this cyber stuff in SOF. And so I had the opportunity to go to a bunch of classes. The idea was, Ken, you got a computer degree. We're going to send you to these classes. You're going to come back and you're going to teach all of us how to do it. And so I discovered both my passion for security and teaching at the same time. The first class, like day one that I took there, it's like intro to ethical hacking, and we're getting our hands on some tools and some exciting things and finding vulnerabilities. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, can I come back in a year and work for all of you? And so it got really set up on a path for success, which was really great. Connected with a company based in Cleveland, where I'm at, and then ended up out in industry. I spent some time at a large financial institution on a red team, which if you're unfamiliar with the term, it's just a collection of ethical hackers. But in this case, it was internal to the bank, and then just came back to RSM because they purchased the firm that I used to work for. And in my current role, I focus a lot on operations, so working with our scheduling teams to make sure the right talent is going to the right place. My university experience means I do a lot of internal training, a lot of external training, both technical and more awareness focused. And it's, again, found my passions and able to act on them, which is pretty exciting. And get to see a different type of security, right? So we're not on the defensive side. I get to, be the bad guy, right? Which is also just cool in its own right.
Excellent. So you both come from different backgrounds. You're sit in the different sides of cybersecurity. So tell us some kind of horror stories that you've encountered over the years in each of your unique roles.
Well, I thought I just did.
Yeah, I know you have more.
Another horror story that comes to mind, there's a handful of them, but that happened to us, which is something you really don't defend against, and that's and it's a byproduct, I think, of being successful and having sites that are used by a lot of people, right? Especially in this industry. You got a big old target on your back, and we do a lot of work in the prepaid card industry. Systems that deal with literally billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of people, global, multilingual sites, and because of that, we are constantly combating different threats every day. But one in particular that we just were blindsided by was that a bunch of bad actors cloned our sites. They didn't clone our source code or anything, but they cloned our sites, which is not something you necessarily look out for. So just imagine a site that looks exactly like yours, which is pretty easy to do. Just change one letter in the domain name and then advertise that on Google so that when someone's searching for you, they're really getting to this cloned website. And the cloned website is there just to capture sensitive data. In this case, it was all PII, it was credit card information. And to us, everything looks legitimate. Everything looks okay. You look through our logs, you look through our systems. There's no breaches, everything's clean. There's clean redemptions. But you get all these end users saying, hey, my money's gone or my data was stolen. And we say, well, yeah, we can see you did it yesterday at 1 p.m. or whatever. And they would say, I did, but I didn't take anything. And so you kind of scratch your heads, and again, you dig through billions of records of log files, and you don't find anything actually quite out of the ordinary. But what we did find was some odd referral traffic to our sites, and not a lot, but enough that was questionable. And we said, that's weird. That kind of looks like our domain, but it's not. So imagine your domain names and just adding an S at the end of it, making it look plural. Or if you've got an A and they just change it to a Q. So unbeknownst to the user, they can't really tell. And then they advertise these sites on Google. So people search and they just click on the first thing they see. It's still pretty impressive to me that people are not direct typing in domain names to a URL bar. They're just searching Google for them. So that's a real problem that we experience. But I think a bigger horror story that probably resonates easier is, and it's an old story, 2014. If you guys remember the Target hacks and the Home Depot hacks, these are large corporations that have pretty good security posture, and they certainly have the money to have as much cybersecurity as they can think of. But cyber criminals do their research. They're patient people. Again, this is a business, and I believe Microsoft did a case study for Target's network, so kind of boasting about the technology that was at Target. They explained all the different Microsoft virtual servers they put in. They explained the Windows servers they put in and the latest SQL boxes. And so it was a case study boasting about Target's Microsoft presence, which was digital gold for hackers. It's a blueprint.
You're right. You gave them the keys to the bar.
They gave them the keys. So now all the hackers had to do was figure out how to get into Target's walls, right? Once they got in, they'd be able to figure out how to navigate it because they knew how to expose all those vulnerabilities against those systems. So they figured out the third parties that had access to Target. In this case, it was an HVAC contractor, legitimate third-party access, secure VPN tunnel, Active Directory authentication, all the checkboxes, all the right things. But the hackers hacked the third party. The hackers put malware on the HVAC person's computer. So as you can imagine, an HVAC contractor probably doesn't have the best security posture. He or she was hit with malware. They waited a month. Once that HVAC contractor logged into Target, it was game over. And what they did was they put malware on the point of sale systems at Target. And this is basically the identical hack that happened at Home Depot. So, if you can just imagine these hackers getting a hold of the source code for your point of sale system, so every point of sale system at Target and Home Depot had malware on them for months. And you would just swipe your credit card, you would have your first name, last name, which is in your credit card stripe, as well as your email address, because now you're typing in your email address to get receipts emailed to you. I think it was 50 million plus compromised identities. Target found it pretty quick. I think it took them 3 to 4 weeks to find the malware in their point of sale software. Home Depot was much longer. But the point of that is, and the horror piece of it, and we can talk about killware now, which is a new term coming out, not just malware, but you can have a really good security posture and you can do a lot of good things right, but it's a cliche, you're only as strong as your weakest link. But I think those give you pretty good examples that you can take down an entire company as big as Target and Walmart because the HVAC guy was not paying attention to an email that he clicked on. So it's a big game we're playing in, and everyone's got to take it pretty seriously.
So my team, my role, right, our job is to create those horror stories, right? But in a controlled environment, so we can say, look, if this had been real, this would have been game over, right? And I'm fortunate enough for me, not fortunate enough for the company we're working with, but we had an incident just yesterday. So we were performing what we call an internal penetration test. So that would be like somebody from my team coming to your place of business under contract and all right, like we're not, we're the good people. So where we come to your place of business and we plug into the network, just like we're a legitimate employee or we're somebody who has a foothold in the network, right? And so for this company, the goal was to compromise the network, right? They said that's the end state is we want you to be able to get to that point and tell us how you got there. So pretty quick in the engagement, which started, really that same day. So this was Wednesday. just yesterday. So a lot of plane rides the last couple of days. So plugged into the network, and my tester enumerated out some usernames just right away. Just by observing traffic on the network, we were able to get around about 1,000 usernames, about 1,000 usernames we had gathered in the first hour or so by just doing some really basic checks and things like that. Nothing vulnerable at this point, just kind of the way the network works. So then from that point, we started password guessing. And so one of the techniques we use is called reverse dictionary attacks. So we use a single bad password, and we guess it across all 1,000 usernames that we have. And the reason for that is it minimizes the chance for lockout, right? So if you give three bad guesses, your account gets locked. 5 bad guesses, your account gets locked. And likely the defender gets an alert of some kind. And so something's happening. So by guessing 1 against 1,000, we still get 1,000 tries, but it's only 1 missed per, right? So there's a bunch of reasons for that. So at the end of that guess, we had about 50 accounts that we had now the username and password for. And the password we guessed was summer 2021. So the word summer and then 2021. And there were 50 accounts in the 1,000 that had that password. Now, it was an organization of like 20,000. So in the big picture, it's pretty infinitesimally small number of accounts. And we still didn't have anything at this point. There were roughly 30 of those accounts that were privileged, which meant they had local administrator on something, right? And that's what we're getting at. That's basically the first step to getting additional access. And so my tester, who is still relatively new, so it doesn't take a lot of experience to be able to get to even to this point. So he was like, they have multi-factor authentication on all of these privileged accounts. So multi-factor being not just a username and a password, but you need something else, right? You'll get a text to the phone or a pop-up that says, "Is this you?" Approved. So you have to have it's something you know, something you have, or something you are, like a biometric, right? Those are the three factors. So this particular company used a pop-up on the phone, a push notification, and he said, they're going to get a push notification. Is this even worth going down? We got 50 tries. Go for it. Or 30 tries, go for it. On the 3rd attempt, somebody got the pop-up and clicked approve. So we were just trying to remote access into different systems.
Wait. They approved it without doing it themselves.
Without doing it, it says, "Is this you?" I'm sure you've seen this before, but it was, so there's a full context here. It was like 7:30 in the morning, so pre-coffee time for a lot of folks, right? Or they're just getting out of their cars, going to work, and it's a split second, right? It pops up and says, approved, deny, two big buttons. Yeah, right, exactly. Someone it might have been a fat finger. We don't know the full context, but the long and short of it was 30 minutes after that we got that access, we had full control of the domain. So in a real attack, that would have been it, right? Reputational damage, data exfiltration, money stolen. It was, again, it would have been bad. Now the good news is we can go back and say, hey, here's the path we took. Right? Here's obviously bad passwords, right? And we'll come back. We'll come back to that item. But we go back and help them fill in the gaps, right? Which is the important part. But that kind of thing happens frequently, right? And is a big issue.
Yeah, it makes me think of you build the castle and the wall, big wall and the moat, and all it takes is one guard to get compromised, and all your enemies are in the building for sure. That's exactly what both scenarios.
And with two-factor authentication too, we use it, and I get a pop-up on my phone, whenever I log in every day, twice a day, 3 times a day. I've never had to hit deny. Mm-hmm. So your immediate instinct
muscle memory
is the muscle memory.
Yeah.
So that's
yeah. So lots of interesting information on some current recent attacks. But let's dive a little bit deeper in this. Kind of get more kind of grounded, concrete for the people in the room. So as you're going through these scenarios in your daily lives, what are some of the common mistakes that you see businesses make in terms of cybersecurity awareness and prevention and all of that?
Do you mind if I carry through in the password?
Yeah, perfect.
Go do it.
So I would say from a very tactical perspective, because these types of tests, the penetration tests, the application security tests, these are point-in-time assessments, right? So it could have been that person we got, the next time they don't make that mistake. All 30 people could have changed their passwords in the next 30 minutes, right? Like, we can't tell the future with these. So these assessments are very point in time. So the things that we see on the ground, as I already said, first and foremost is authentication, whether it's bad passwords, not using multi-factor authentication, right? Those are all very important stumbling blocks along the way, right? Attackers, whether they're ethical or otherwise, we are path of least resistance type people, right? I mean, the hacks that make it, into the news very frequently are the well, I guess target's not really complicated, but it was a little more James Bondish, right? Most of the time, 99 out of 100 attacks are bad passwords, phishing, or poor change management. So someone stood up a machine and left all the default configurations there, right? We can look up any software that off-the-shelf software that's ever been written, any appliance that you would put on the network. If it comes with a manual and has default credentials, it's on the internet, right? We can look for that and find it. And so those three things: authentication, phishing, and change management. So tactically, most things come back to that in terms of common mistakes.
And I would say, I mean, judging by the lack of people in this room, it's kind of almost failure to take it seriously enough. But, so I see a lot of failure and a lack of strategy at the executive level with cybersecurity. So cybersecurity, it's not an IT problem, but it always falls on IT. It's a business problem, and it needs to be a top-down strategy. It's a team sport. It can't be done in a vacuum. It's kind of this ecosystem that has to live and breathe within your organization as a strategy. So failure to understand where your true threat is, failure to understand whether it's that third party or whether it's where you're putting your data. People aren't really strategizing enough around their cybersecurity posture. And CISA, which is the cybersecurity, I always mess it up, Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, right?
That
I get
right,
that,
yeah.
Thank you. So they, based on data, I think they take about 50,000 different breaches that happen every year, and they have data around why they were breached. And they essentially give you best practices, and they say, follow these best practices if you want to take your security posture seriously. And apparently not enough people were even listening to that, so they changed their messaging, and they said, okay, since you're not listening to what we tell you to do, just listen to what we tell you not to do. And so they gave you top 3 things not to do, and he kind of hit on a couple of them. Because the 3 top ways people are getting beat right now, and it's incredible, we still have to talk about it, it's weak and bad passwords. So passwords that are shipped with your software and your hardware by default. The admin username and the admin password. Password 123. The things that are coming with your hardware and your software, people aren't changing that. So it's an easy access right in. That's the number one thing. Single factor authentication is one more critical thing you have to stop using, especially on critical systems. Make everything 2-factor or multi-factor. And then the third is stop using end-of-life and out-of-support systems for critical functions. So continue to update your systems, continue to, if you got old Windows servers out there, even though they're running, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it, that mentality really doesn't work. Fix it. It's broken. It's vulnerable. The average software today is being created with 50+ open source libraries. Every open source library has known vulnerabilities. And the software developers if they're not trained properly, they're not going to be updating these libraries. They're just going to be building on top of those libraries. So after 2 or 3 years, instead of 50 open source libraries, you're going to have 150. And it's not a bad thing in the sense that using those open source libraries, they make software building more efficient, and they make it faster, they make it cheaper, but they make it incredibly vulnerable. And so you got to protect against that. So those are the top 3 things that the CISA is telling you to do, and the messaging that they're changing is actually fairly significant, because now when it comes time to legal battles or lawsuits, if you find yourself being sued because of a data breach, if you find yourself needing insurance coverage because of a data breach, you might find that that's going to be a bigger battle for you, because if you're now shown to be doing something that's more negligent, it's one thing just to have best practices and say I can't follow it. It's another thing to have an agency tell you not to do certain things that you're still doing. So that's really, those are three of probably the biggest common mistakes, and that's based on data from CISA. And I'd say another thing that I see all the time is people not having the proper insurance coverage. Cyber insurance coverage is not part of your general liability, at least it's not in my industry, so it's probably not in your industry. Make sure that you have proper cybersecurity breach coverage. I'd be surprised if everyone in this room does have it. So those are some things that I know that people are not doing that I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So taking it a little bit one step further, one of these fine people catch you in the elevator, or the fine people that miss this, conversation, realized how important it is, and then track you down. And they said, what can I do on Monday when I get back to the office? I hear you, it's a lot to tackle, there's a lot going on, but give me a short list. What could I do when I get back to my office on Monday and start on the right path for cybersecurity? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I'd say passwords. Right now, the current best practice for minimum characters of length in a password is 12. I would say most organizations we do testing for, which span from mom and pop shops all the way up to Fortune 100 companies, everyone usually sits around 8 or 9 characters minimum. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But the truth of it is, up to 12 characters or up to 11 characters, they're still reasonably guessable, right? The example I gave, we found summer 2021, right? It's got uppercase, it's got a lowercase, it's got a number, right? That's 3 of the complexity factors of 4 for passwords. So on paper, it sounds like a great password, right? And it's more than 8. But the problem there is another issue of rotation, right? So how do you happen to know how often your organizations rotate passwords? I don't, obviously, but there's a pretty common number.
30 for us. 90 days.
30? So 90 days is the key, right? It aligns perfectly with seasons of the year, which is why guessing passwords like summer 2021, fall, and winter, that's always our first guess going in. And with
summer and the winter, is that a good password?
if you don't rotate it. So actually, that's an interesting point, because NIST actually just recently changed their recommendation to not rotate passwords unless there's a known security issue, because people get in the habit of either iterating 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, or following a pattern.
Yep. Especially in our different timing.
Yep.
Horrible.
No, absolutely.
Makes you go generic so you don't forget everything.
Exactly.
Hired in the summer of 2021.
Yeah, also there. Yep.
Well, you can talk a little more about password list, which is probably a big word that people are going to hear pretty soon with Windows 11.
Yes, yeah. So there's the passwordless authentication coming out. Has anyone heard of this? Familiar with it? Yeah. So we were talking about this earlier. I'm very skeptical, right, of how it's going to work, how it's going to roll out, because a lot of the authentication pieces beyond password, like once you have access to a system, then it doesn't become passwords anymore. It becomes the authentication token, the password hash itself, or the hash of whatever authentication piece it is. So that gate becomes a problem. Attempts made to get into other factors of authentication, again, something you have like your phone, or biometrics, something you are. If you for example, if you happen to use biometrics on your phone, you still have to set a passcode, right? Because it's not perfect, right? The what they call the crossover error rate between oversensitive and undersensitive. So oversensitive being you have to mash your thumb 1,000 times to get it to react, right? Or oversensitive being I can share my phone with my brother who looks alike and it unlocks it either way, right? So losing that guaranteed point of entry with a passcode, a password, or whatever. Like I said, I love the idea. I don't think we're going to get there for a while. I don't know how do you?
I'm very skeptical of it. I mean, to me, I just, the next problem, if we do password lists, the next problem is just going to be everyone's phone's going to be stolen, and that's going to be the biggest thing that, but, for me, to answer your question, I would say training is the biggest thing. At our company, we do security awareness training every other week. And I know Big Pharma, I have friends in Big Pharma, and I have friends in other organizations that do security awareness training once a year, once every 6 months. I guess you have to figure out what's best for you, but I know that once every other week It takes 5 or 10 minutes. It's kind of in your face. It's making you second guess everything you click on. It's making you second guess every email you get. It's making you look at those domain names before you are too quick to react. It's probably making you second guess that approve button when you get that 2-factor notification. So we do it every 2 weeks. I think it works great. From a software development point of view, I think there's a million things people can do that I know that they don't, such as the use of static and dynamic code testing, secure code training, which is separate from awareness training. It's just teaching a way to securely code. Security audits and penetration tests, which is where RSM can come in. And, picking a compliance, your companies might not need to be compliant for certain things, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't. And picking a compliance, we pick PCI compliance because we do a lot in the payment card industry, but PCI compliance can benefit everyone in this room. Maybe not one section out of the 10 sections that are in the PCI guidelines, but all those other 9 sections are going to make you incredibly stronger, and they're going to make you realize all these things that you're not doing that you should be doing. So training, compliances. Another really cool thing I like is a vulnerability disclosure program. And we were talking about this earlier. Not all bad actors are career criminals. They don't go into this saying, "How can I steal a bunch of money from your company today?" They kind of they're people playing around, and they stumble upon something. And they can go one of 2 routes. They can go that career criminal route, and they can use it to their advantage, and they can steal, and they can take you down, or they can go an ethical route and have a secure private channel to you and your organization to report that vulnerability and explain how they found it, and maybe they get a reward for it, and they get to work with you to patch it, and that could be very fulfilling and rewarding to them. Plus, you can build in a workflow within your organization on how to handle that vulnerability. And it can go to the proper channels, and it can be handled in the best and most appropriate way, because you cannot plug a vulnerability overnight. A lot of the times you hear about these hacks in the news, and how did it take them so long to fix it? These things take time. It's more patching that they have to do, and those patches have to be tested and securely, reviewed. So big companies like Target and Walmart, big boxes, are doing this now. They have a published vulnerability disclosure program, which will help, give that potentially bad actor a good way out, and to allow them to work with you. So I think that's something really cool that people can do. Ransomware is a big rage right now. I think you said it, $250,000 is the average ransomware ransom being paid right now. I think companies should discuss internally and have a strategy around not if they get hacked and get held ransom, but when they do, and have those discussions. Should you pay it? Should you not pay it? I'm not saying you should or you shouldn't. I'm just saying have those discussions with your leadership teams. What happens when that does happen, and what is your response, and what is your disaster recovery plan and business continuity plan look like when that does happen, and what are you going to do with that money? And then of course, I talked about it before, but third-party reviews. I think companies should be reviewing all their third parties, making sure that they're following best practices, making sure that they have to disclose in a certain amount of time contractually with you how long, what does that time frame look like when they find out that they've been breached or exposed to, what does that timeline look like to when they have to disclose that to you? So there's a lot of things, we can probably talk for an hour about the different things companies can be doing, but strategy, executive strategy, training. Your employees are your biggest risk, in my opinion. They are within your perimeter. They have the most access. You compromise them, your business could be taken down pretty quickly. So train them and don't stop training them.
And the training we do at Liventus every 2 weeks, and it's a video and a quiz after. It's really painless. And it has trained me of all these minor things. It just keeps me more alert. And again, doing it once a year, I would totally forget everything.
It's pointless.
Totally forget.
Do you access a training program for that, like an outside company?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a couple. We've used Proofpoint and KnowBefore. I think KnowBefore is superior. I haven't used Proofpoint. There's a company called Wombat, which I think Proofpoint bought.
Yeah.
And then I think that the KnowBefore tells you it kind of gives you a much better outlook. Yeah, KNOW,
Yeah.
the number, and then B, and then the number 4. What's cool about them too is they give you just an overall risk of your entire company. They kind of give your company a score based on
dashboard.
how your employees are doing. They'll give you a report on your entire company on how many people have been pawned, which basically means how many of our passwords with our usernames are on the dark web. I guarantee we all have 50 of our passwords out there, which is why passwords are really meaningless at this point. We talk about two-factor authentication. And another cool thing KnowBefore does is
Tells you like your riskiest employees.
yeah, so I mean, when you get that report and you see that, you know, it doesn't happen in our company, but imagine if it happens in your company, that the head of your, you know, accounting department, or you know, the head of your the people that do your payroll. Imagine if they're failing their awareness training, or the people that have access to your bank accounts for your company. What do you do with them after they've failed their awareness training over and over and over again? Maybe they shouldn't have access to what they have access to. Maybe they have to go through certain boot camps to be trained better. Maybe they, you know, don't get employed there anymore. I mean, you guys have decisions to make, but if people are constantly falling for potential attacks, that's your business, that's your company. It's a real problem that, again, that it needs that executive level strategy. It's not an IT problem.
Yeah, I think what is interesting about what, as we've been talking today, that cybersecurity is very complex, and there's a whole James Bond element to it for sure. But you don't have to worry about that.
Does that mean we're James Bond?
Huh?
Does that mean like we're James Bond?
I definitely am.
I know, I'm sure. MI6, yeah, of course. If that's what you want.
That's probably true.
That's probably true.
That's a good thought.
However, a lot of this stuff you can prevent is very simple, like the training. And Ken, you were telling us a story earlier about the entry.
Yeah,
Just tell that story, because it is about how simple some of these securities measures are, and how people are just missing the simplest stuff to keep their companies secure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about up here is processes, right? So there's really 3 different types of controls we can discuss when we're looking at information security. We have people, we have processes, and technology. So an example would be, you know, a people control would be like a security guard, right? Very obvious. A technology control would be a firewall, right? And a process would be how to run the firewall, or what are the guard's duties, or what does our training look like? It's all the intangible piece. And the process falls away first, always. And so the example that I frequently use, so I used to run the physical security breach team in the consulting group I was with, you know, several years ago, which meant we did all the stuff we've been talking about, hacking the company, but you have to substitute actually physically breaking into the company for hacking. So lockpicking, social engineering, which is actually, I was having a ball with our mentalists there, because it's a lot of the same type of stuff, interacting with people, getting them to do things that aren't in their best interests on behalf of a criminal, right? So trying to get into facilities. So there was a specific instance where it was myself and 2 others, one of whom was a trainee. We were tasked with getting into a research lab in the manufacturing sector. And so we did our remote reconnaissance, went on Google Earth and tried to find out, you know, what does the target look like, where are the entrances, exits, where are the cameras, get on Street View, where are the guards, if we see anyone carrying a radio, you know, can we look up on open source and see if there's anything we can find. Then we get to the site and drive around and confirm suspicions, just decide that just walking in the front entrance in the beginning of the day is the best option for us. So this particular facility, the lobby had, I'm sure there's an official name for them, but we called them optical turnstiles. So it's turnstiles, but just an IR beam, an infrared beam going through it. So if you walk through the turnstile without badging in, it's beep, 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 sets off a huge alarm, and, you know, the guard will call you over and say, you know, do you work here? Where's your badge? So the technique we were going to use was called a false tailgate. So I was going to walk through and set off the alarm and go, I forgot my badge, I'll be right back. But create some sort of distraction. My partner, the trainee, was going to walk behind me, again, not coming in the door together, just slightly behind, offset. And again, there's nuances and techniques and all that. But he was going to have a replicated badge. We had found on social media someone had done this, where they flip the badge around in the picture. We're always going to find the front. Never flip your badge around in a social media picture, because the back of the badge is what makes it seem legitimate, right? Whenever guards grab badges, the first thing they do when they pick it up is flip it over to see if there's a badge. So there's a tidbit for you there. So social media pictures just take off the badges. So anyway, they hadn't done this. We had replicated one of their badges. So my trainee had one of those badges. So I'm all set to walk through the turnstile, getting mentally prepped, all ready to go. I had my story in my head, and nothing happened. Walked through, no big deal. So you can't stumble and pause, because at that point I don't want to cause a scene. So we got in, we ended up getting Project X and getting into the labs and everything. We were in the facility walking around for about 2 hours, and then left the facility through a side door, a smoke pit, and we're fine. So we report out 2 weeks later. We did our report, did up the whole scenario, and they had a guard, they had the turnstiles, they had been installed for a year. Nobody had checked to see if they were turned on. Yeah. So they've been in operation for a year. So luckily they were good humor about it, and we ended up doing business with them for the next 3 years. So again, the process falls off. They thought, we're good. We have the tech. We have the guard watching over it. No process for who was going to handle the actual machine. So.